Hello and welcome to this latest episode of You Matter. Hello and welcome to You Matter. In this episode, I welcome back my good friend Joanne Elphinston with a very specific remit for this session. Joanne and I are launching something very exciting in the new year called Coaching Unpeeled. And we are more than aware that coaching has entered not just the clinical sphere, but seems like life in general. Everybody is talking about coaching in different forms. And you may be looking on, you might be curious, you may know a bit about coaching. Maybe you're wondering if this might apply to you in your life and particularly in your clinical life. We think it does, but in a very specific and particular way. And that's what Coaching Unpeeled is all about. So we're going to, as is our usual way, riff on that together, see where the conversation takes us. But ultimately, the aim is to tell you a little bit more about Coaching Unpeeled, what it's going to look like, and whether it might be something that you're interested in. So sit back and just enjoy the conversation about coaching. And if you're interested in hearing more about Coaching Unpeeled, then we give you some ideas of how to do that later. And just as a little personal aside, this is going out on my birthday, December the 8th, I hope, if I got my calculations right as to the launch date of this episode. So why do I need to tell you that? Well, happy birthday to me, and what a lovely way to celebrate my birthday to have this episode with Joanne going out. I hope you enjoy it. Take care. Don't forget to sign up if you are interested in Coaching Unpeeled. And I will be back again at the end to remind you of what to do. Take care. Hello and welcome to this next episode of You Matter. All my episodes are a pleasure, but this is an especially large pleasure, especially big pleasure, because I am thrilled to welcome back to You Matter my good friend and colleague Joanne Elphinston. Hello, Joanne.
Hello, Jo. It's very exciting for me too. I had such a lovely time last time I was with you, so I am looking forward to another beautiful conversation.
Absolutely. So, Joanne and I are here for quite a particular reason together today. The title of the episode should give you a hint. Everyone's talking about coaching. And Joanne and I have been talking about coaching quite a lot because we have something very exciting launching early next year. It's coming under the title of Coaching Unpeeled, and that title should make a little more sense as you listen to our conversation today. But Joanne, I'm going to hand over to you and let you explain a little bit about what we are doing with Coaching Unpeeled.
Sure, Jo. Well, this is just such a lovely opportunity for us both to do something we really care about. Jo, I know, has the same motivations as I do for clinician well-being and standards of practice and all those lovely things. And a lot of people are talking about coaching right now. And obviously, it's something that Jo and I know quite a lot about because Jo, as you'll be more than familiar with how much Jo has been doing in the field. Those of you who've trained in gyms also know it's been part of that for 20 years or so. But suddenly, it is in the general conversation now. And you might be wondering what it's all about. Is it relevant to you? Is it something that would be helpful in exploring? What we've done is taken all of that experience and a considerable amount of training and weeded it all out to bring it right down to what is going to be the most powerful and helpful for you in clinical practice. Hence, Coaching Unpeeled. So yeah, there we go.
Yeah, we've already given ourselves the opportunity for loads of references to zest and pith, and even taking the pith out of ourselves occasionally.
You know what? I just think taking the pith is just gold. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to have to
We're
drop
not
that
taking
line.
the pith here.
Exactly. But yeah, Joanne's absolutely right. There's a whole world of coaching and variations of coaching approaches, people applying it in all sorts of different arenas. The thing it reminds me of actually is when mindfulness started and we all wondered what it was and was it just for yogis and people that were really into meditation. And then suddenly there was mindful walking, mindful talking, mindful playing with your kids, mindful everything. And I think coaching is going through a little bit of that process itself.
Mm,
Um, and many of those things are really good things. Coaching principles can absolutely be applied to work and so many areas of life.
mm,
But because it's that way, we felt for clinicians, we wanted, as Joanne says, to really distill it down, to demystify coaching a little bit, but also to make sure that we were talking about the bits that are really relevant to the clinical scenario and also really relevant to you as a clinician.
mm,
Because we're going to talk in a moment about those two sides of it. We often go on courses, don't we? And we're really invested in what we can learn to better our service for the patient. And it's not always in our mind to consider how that actually benefits us. But one of the beautiful things about coaching is that it can be this two-way process. And yeah, I think that's where a large part of the value is here, that yes, you can apply it clinically for your patient, but it's going to open up so much opportunity, so much freedom, and I would say from personal experience, so much relief for yourself as a clinician. Joanne, do you want to speak about that a little bit more?
yeah, no, absolutely. Joe, it's so interesting because as Joe said, we go on these courses and we learn techniques to do, often to the patient.
Mm,
And that is absolutely not what coaching is about. With it comes this sense of it is my job to fix the patient. So the full shouldering of all responsibility, which is heavy and actually possibly not in the patient's best interests and not in your best interests. So it's interesting because in this funny binary world we live in, we often assume that if it's better for the patient, then it's okay that we sacrifice a bit from ourselves. Or if we should actually decide that maybe we should do something that is making our feeling of being in our job more sustainable, more enjoyable, heaven forbid, more enjoyable, then somehow we're taking something away from the patient. And it's a really interesting little paradoxical feeling that we have inside about this, that somebody in this interaction it's going to cost.
mm,
And I think the joy of understanding how coaching principles can help you to frame your clinical interaction, really things that you will all relate to, like management of expectations. How many times do clinicians tell me that they're thinking that the patient thinks this or the patient thinks that, and I'm like, really? How do you know that? And then you realize it's a grand assumption based around anxiety, which is around expectation management.
mm,
All of that can be sorted out with some really simple principles. And that's just one example of how you can start to ease some of these areas of real tension for yourself. And at the same time, really provide some clarity for the patient and give the patient the opportunity to really start to step into this with you. So it isn't you here with all the responsibility, carrying the patient on your shoulders, and then saying, oh, well, the patient's not taking responsibility. Well, yeah, of course they're not, because you're taking all the responsibility. You've got to create some space for them to step in.
mm,
So there's just so many elements in the clinician experience, that anxiety, and that feeling, oh, I didn't get it right, for example, or it didn't work. Okay, we can talk about that a lot. Whenever someone says, oh, I tried this, it didn't work. So what does not working mean to you? And then when we step back and then look at that again and go, so what did we learn from it instead? The roadblock stops and the motion gets going again.
mm.
So there's lots of elements around the things that I know, Joe, you'll be encountering in your coaching that I encounter in my own coaching and my teaching, that clinicians just again and again struggle with and leads them towards burnout and feelings of not coping and feelings of not being good enough. So many of these things can be helped with some really simple principles and some really simple structural elements that can ease a lot of that.
Yeah. And I wonder if it's with for people that haven't experienced coaching at all, or either received it or had any education. I wonder if it's worth me just outlining a little bit about what that structure is, because I think straight away clinicians listening in will be able to see how this does apply so beautifully to the clinical interaction. So partnership is an absolute, gold standard tenement of coaching. And to me, that's why it's so topical, because how many times do we hear that the modern evidence-based way to work with a client is in partnership to empower your patient, to give them agency. And the way you do that within coaching is that you begin a session, or a clinic session, or a pure coaching session with well, an agreement comes early, but not right at the beginning. You can't agree on something until you have learned something about your patient first. So you come from this place of curiosity. Your patient turns up that day with something going on, and it may be something you already know about because it's not your first session, or they may be in an entirely different state to the state they were in when you met them on their first session, whatever. You start from this place of curiosity. Where are you at today? And from that interaction between the two of you, which may involve quite a number of questions and answers between the two of you, you then get to the point where you agree together what the end point of that session is going to be. So that's the first thing, that you agree together. And critically, that isn't you telling the patient. It is genuinely an agreement which you couldn't possibly have predicted beforehand. This is one of the first places to try and shift. Try not to know, try not to predict. Just allow your patient or your coaching client to tell you or to lead you, agree with you. Once you've made that agreement, you then agree how you're going to get there. And that might be 2 or 3 steps. And then you agree where you're going to start. So I'm not going to give more away than that now, but I hope people are starting to realize that the reason there's so much relief around this is you're not actually leading or providing anything. You are just asking, where are you now? Where do you want to be? What steps do you think we need to take to get there? And where should we start? And that covers off quite a few things. Joe and I had a quick conversation before we pressed record around the issue of compliance. I think, Joanne, you said you were actually asked the question by somebody, well, how do you deal with compliance when you're using a coaching approach? I mean, actually, I hope what I've just described has illustrated that compliance is implicit within a coaching approach, because the client has led it. They have told you what they want to do. It's come from them. So therefore, they must be okay with that. Of course, you can record it, and your notes will make that compliance more robust. But compliance is really implicit in that process. Now, there were 2 things when I started this line of thought. I was going to say it leads you to compliance. Yeah, and the other thing is behavior change and adherence to exercise regimes, agreements around what you're going to do between sessions. You'll see, if you start to adopt this approach with coaching clients or patients, that there's so much more adherence, because it feels personal. They actually came up with the solution themselves. They came up with the method themselves. Therefore, it makes sense to them why they're doing it, and they really understand what they're doing, because basically they designed the process, not you.
Yeah, it's so true what you say, Joe. I around, the issues of compliance, as I was saying to you earlier, someone had asked me, like, how do you manage patient compliance? And as I said, I was like, I don't actually have a compliance problem. And they were a bit, perplexed by this. So, well, that usually comes in the same kind of categories. Yes, but how many reps and sets? do you give people? And the answer is, what can be managed in their life? So I'll give you an example. I've got a lovely patient. She is right in the maelstrom that some of you might kind of relate to. She's in her 40s. She's got 3 children and a husband, and there's like school runs and activities. Everything's going everywhere. Her son arrives at the foot of her bed at 6:20, fully dressed for school and expecting to go. And so the answer to the question is, okay, where in your day do you have a slice of time? And we found that the time in the day was between 6 a.m. and 6:10. Okay, so does that sound feasible to you? That's manageable? Yeah, no, it's okay. I wake up anyway. I'm just lying there kind of contemplating how I'm going to get through the day. Okay, then. Does that sound like a good time to be able to commit? Yeah, I'd really like that actually, because I know that that's time for me to just focus on this before the hurricane starts. Perfect. So what are we doing there? We're doing what's going to fit in that time slot. And we've had that agreement. Now, if she comes back and said, I haven't managed to do it, then we get to find out, and, what are your feelings around that? Well, it could be either I just haven't been able to find the motivation, but that very rarely ever happens. Usually there might have been other stuff that's come into life. And once we hear about that, instead of feeling so down on herself, which is exactly where she went straight away, she's like, well, actually, the fact that you have a mother in hospital with a suddenly diagnosed terminal illness on top of everything else has created a bit of, issues with the bandwidth. And it's okay because, tomorrow's another day. And so there we go. And so other people will want more. If we're going to really talk about patient autonomy, this is a big one for me, because we're all about, oh yes, patient autonomy, but we cannot be saying that while taking all the responsibility and then dictating what happens. So if I have occasionally had, because I tend to work with people with more chronic and persistent problems, a person who we've made an agreement and they've come back and not done it. And really, it's just all been about just not committing to the agreement. How do I respond to that? Well, I'm going to ask them some questions around that. But I'm also going to have a very, this is all I have to offer you. We made an agreement. I can't actually do that. There's nothing else I can do. How are you choosing to go forward then? Because it's fine, but I don't have anything extra. So possibly I'm not the person for you. And I know people are like, oh, you'd let the patient go. I'm like, well, yeah, I don't have a problem with that, because actually, if they don't go away and reflect and then come back and say, okay, that is an old pattern and now I get it and I'm ready now. Great, we move forward. But what I don't do is put myself in a situation of continued energy expenditure over responsible, when if I actually honor the fact that this person is making an autonomous choice, I have given them the information for them to make an informed choice. And if they do not choose that route, they have a right to that.
Yeah.
But that I don't have to keep supporting that when I know that actually that's not benefiting the patient and it's not my role to keep facilitating that pattern.
You're so right. I have so many clinicians, particularly more junior clinicians, come to me. Maybe we're talking about a patient they're struggling with. And more often than not, there will be this whole list of, okay, they came to me with this shoulder problem. I tried this exercise, I tried this technique. Then the next exercise, it wasn't better. So I tried this, I tried that, da 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 da. And you're right, the default is to just keep changing and keep pulling out something else from the toolkit, not investigating, as you say, why maybe why a technique didn't work, but more importantly, why the patient didn't engage in maybe what you told them to do rather than what you had agreed to do. And I love lots of things about that case study you've just shared. Yes, you got her to recognize the fact that there was 10 minutes in her day. And that's probably the biggest lesson she took home that day, that of course her life felt like this because it was so full of all the responsibilities, but also then to realize that that was her opportunity and it was her choice to take it. And of course, we know that if she chose to take it, that probably would shift her mindset and allow her to find other 10-minute slots in her day. But yeah, it's entirely her choice, and it's not your responsibility or the treating clinician's responsibility to shift focus just because one side of the agreement hasn't been upheld.
Mm.
And that's, I think, where, coaching sometimes, I think, can have a reputation of being a bit nicey-nicey, and, partnership is just all about not telling and being this curious, lovely person. Sometimes it's about being really strong and holding your line until such time to move on.
Mm. Absolutely. I mean, I had a lovely thing come up on a recent, coaching retreat that I just did.
Mm,
And I was describing this kind of a situation. And then someone said, but don't you feel sad? I'm like, why? Is it because you could have helped them? I'm like, I don't feel sad at all. Um, and they were a bit perplexed. And I said, well, if I'm going to honor the fact that this person is autonomous and they are making a choice, then I don't have to keep an emotional tie to that.
mm,
And that doesn't make me a terrible, awful person, that I'm not kind of keeping all these emotional ties. But I could save them. No, I don't feel sad.
mm,
Because I know I've given that person the best shot I'm able to do, and maybe someone else will give them a different kind of thing, and it's okay too.
mm, mm.
But I honor her choice and
Yeah.
let her go. Yeah. And then I'm good with that. I don't have to carry these, and we are caring people. And this is again, I think, and I'm sure you come across this too, Joe, that conflict between feeling like you want to be a caring person, what makes me a good person, and having my own boundaries.
Mm,
And also understanding that other people are making choices, and we don't become better people by taking their choices from them.
mm. And we're going to include that, aren't we, in our course, that self-regulation, boundary setting, um, self-worth, really, which is a really important part of upholding your part in this process.
And do you find, Joe, like people, certainly I find for myself, but I'm pretty sure you probably do too, that one of the issues for clinicians is often their self-worth is tagged to the outcome of the patient.
Mm,
So your feeling of actual independent self-worth is not independent at all. It's constantly dependent on other people. And actually that isn't self-value
mm.
at
Yeah,
all.
and yes, outcome of a session, outcome of a whole treatment protocol. So often, this is more in pure coaching necessarily than in physio, but I often get the feedback of from the client, oh my goodness, I had no idea the session was going to go there. And invariably my response is, well, I definitely had no idea. And that's the point. It's such a relief to give yourself permission to have no idea where a session is going to go, but to trust yourself and the patient that it will go exactly where it needs to. And so whatever that outcome is, which you can't predict, it's the right outcome that day. And the two of you got there together, and then you'll move on to the next session. It's such a relief.
Well, it is. Well, it's a relief when we get practiced with it, isn't it? Because initially it feels really wobbly.
Yes, it's
Um,
confronting, isn't it, to start with?
yeah, I mean, remember when we trained and we got taught that we're writing our notes, and at the bottom was the P for plan, for what's going to happen
Mm.
next time. And I still do a little P. Um, that sounds a bit weird. We'll leave incontinence out of that, but the plan, I do write some notes for where things that I think may be helpful in a subsequent session. 9 times out of 10, none of that happens for
Mm,
exactly the reasons that you've outlined. But actually, by allowing ourselves to respond to what's really there now in the present, Interestingly, although initially you think that feels a bit vulnerable, actually you're responding to what is real and you can actually deal with that instead of trying to squeeze whatever's showing up in the patient that day into something that's not actually relevant for them today. That causes an enormous amount of stress.
Yeah.
But as you say, when we start to kind of go, okay, I'm going to anchor myself here a little bit and let's respond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen and respond.
Absolutely. And as you just said, yeah, that requires some listening.
Mm.
And listening's interesting, isn't it? Listening and hearing being two completely different things.
Yeah. Listening, waiting to add your wisdom, add your reaction is very different to listening and just allowing yourself to be present and really hear. And I don't know about you, but I constantly have to quiet the voice that is going, oh, and what are you going to say about that? And oh, and what's the next thing? It really takes practice as a clinician to dull that voice. And when I started coaching, first of all, the feedback I constantly got from my non-clinical tutors were, you couldn't resist it. You held off rescuing for about three-quarters of the session, but there it was every
Yep.
time. I was, oh, when am I going to, when am I going to be able to give up the rescuing? It's implicit. And as you say, we're nice people, we want to care, and it takes time just to relax that rescuing muscle a little bit. But I think the first time you feel the success of it and you witness the success of it, it really bolsters you to try it again, like any new skill.
Yeah. And absolutely. And when the patient leaves, because they actually owned that, you've got
Mm,
there together. And again, just so we kind of like nail it down to something a little bit concrete, it can be something as simple as you're doing, an exercise or a movement or whatever. And instead of just teaching, this is the exercise, and then saying you should feel this, this, and this, which unfortunately for the patient who doesn't feel that is, we're kind of moving into the shaming
mm,
inadvertently. But if you're kind of told you should feel this and you don't, the patient's in this situation, and then the therapist starts to go, they start to power up because we need to make this happen. And so now both parties are highly stressed, and the whole thing can be avoided by saying, oh, it's so interesting. So what do you feel?
mm,
Oh, okay, so you feel that instead. So let's take something we all know, a basic bridge. Yeah. And you're doing this, and in your heart of hearts, you're hoping that the patient was going to go, oh, I really feel my glutes. And your patient doesn't. And hands up, how many people have had that happen to them? And then we either turn that on ourselves as therapists, going, oh my gosh, it didn't work, or the patient going, oh my gosh, it's the same as always. I've seen 5 physiotherapists and my glutes have never worked and it's just the same again. So there's something really, really wrong with me. Because, of course, we're over here as a physio going, oh, the patient thinks I'm rubbish because they're not feeling their glutes. The patient is thinking, the therapist thinks I'm rubbish because my glutes don't work, and clearly they must do for everybody else. So you can see where all of this dialogue is going on
mm,
between two people in their own little worlds in that space. And if we just stepped out and went, what do you feel? Well, I really feel, my hamstrings. I'm like, okay, that's really great feedback. So remember that. Now let's see what happens. If we move your feet a little bit closer towards you, what happens then? Oh, okay. So that's kind of a little bit closer towards my hip. It's still my hamstrings. Okay, great feedback. So now let's just change this thing again. Now tell me what you noticed there. And so all the way along, they're actually telling you their real-time experience.
mm,
Their feedback is as important as whatever you bring. You're not just trying to fix it. You're actually saying, you're going to bring your expertise, which is your felt experience. I'm going to bring mine for how I might actually
yeah.
alter this in some way. And together we will find our way to a different outcome. Even if that outcome is, this is actually not the best way forward for you, this exercise. And that's not a,
Mm,
sometimes we have to step aside to the side to find something else that the brain can make sense of.
mm. And you've just spoken a little bit there, Joanne, to point I wanted to make sure we covered, which is around this idea of expertise. Because I
Mm.
think people often hear coaching and think, oh, okay, well, that's just dumbing down. There's not much evidence base for all the techniques I've learned. And now this coaching thing's coming in, and it seems like, I don't need to give any answers. I don't need to provide any solutions. I just need to listen and be present. And,
Mhm.
isn't that all just a bit easy? Um, and I like the fact that there might be a sense of ease around it, but I think it's really important that we retain our identity as experts.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know what you think, Joanne, but there's, to me, there's definitely a dance to play between coaching and, well, it might be called outside of the clinical world, a dance between coaching and mentoring, where mentoring is, I have this experience of the thing that you're asking me about. I've walked this path before, and then so I'm going to give you the benefit of my experience. But I think it's slightly different in the clinician patient interaction, in that you did go to college for 3 years, you did learn from seniors, you have done lots of reading, you have done lots of courses, and you've picked up this expertise, which the patient is paying for. Um, but you'll smile, Joanne, because I quote you time and time and time again. It's one of my favorite things you've ever said to me. You said, coaching or partnership is not about withholding your expertise, it's just knowing the exact point of when to land it. And I love that so much because to me, that describes this lovely, easeful place of curiosity. And then it recognizes the point at which a droplet of expertise will move from a stuck place. Um, the ideal is the patient has actually asked you for that piece of information, but let's be honest, they might not, because they might not actually know that that is the thing in that moment that's going to shift them. And we are still experts, we are still clinicians, we still have the mandate, and in fact, we should deliver that piece of expertise in the moment. But the difference is we're not just firing expertise at them. When for them it's probably like trying to drink from a fire hose sometimes, when a clinician is just firing all this information and expertise over and over and over. It's what I love about your sentence is it's this beautiful moment of, ah, yes, that's just when I needed it, not before, not too late, just at the right moment to help us move on.
Oh, well, first of all, I'm grateful that you actually can give me my own words back, Joe, because usually someone said, "Oh, when you said this," and I'm like, "Oh, well, that's quite good. I don't actually have any recollection. Once it's out of my mouth, it's gone." So thank you um,
Pleasure.
for that. But yeah, it's super important. I mean, I was reflecting on even just my patients yesterday, beginning of the week. I'm like, do you know what? I had patients yesterday I could not have treated even a year ago, and that's after 30 something years, because I've kept developing my expertise. And so we in no way are undermining that. But as you say, it's about not actually bludgeoning patients with it when that's not in. I mean, overdosing. Let's look at broccoli. Okay, let's just take a complete sidestep here into the vegetable world. So we all know broccoli is good for us, but it's good for us because it's actually mildly toxic and it stimulates our systems in order to, be more robust immunologically. So, but too much broccoli is a bad thing, you know, just enough broccoli is good. And it's the same with us bestowing I mean, I say bestowing because that's what tends to happen. Bestowing and bludgeoning, there are two things I see. I wrote a piece a while back saying, "Is in our efforts to do patient education, is there any learning going on?" Because we kind of think that if we just keep talking to someone's prefrontal cortex and stuffing it full of all our marvelous facts, that somehow they're going to change.
Mm,
A lot of the time, they shut down because we stuff their prefrontal cortex with all of that, and then we ask them to feel something, totally different part of the brain.
mm,
And we haven't set them up to succeed with that. And that's when you end up with patients who just learn movement rules, or then they come back and going, "I haven't been very good about this," or "my knee's doing that," and it's going nowhere because they haven't felt anything different.
mm,
So that's the other thing too, is that all that knowledge that we have is important for us. We then have to be discerning in what are the as you said, the droplets that can land in such a way without overwhelm.
Mm.
All my patients know quite a lot of neuroscience. But they haven't just had a blast of it. It's just that they're having an experience. And then we can talk
Mm.
about what's happening with that experience. And I love it when they're coming back and they're telling me how they're rewiring things, and they've noticed that, they think that and this happened, and then they believe that and that, and so, oh, actually, that's not about a pathological
Pathological.
thing. That's actually an output that they can learn to problem solve with. And such a good example of it for two patients just yesterday, where they've had some really difficult life stuff come up. And then they've told me how they've been problem solving based on the knowledge and the self-knowledge that they had acquired first. And I was blown away with the self-efficacy, and that kind of not going into a helpless mode, but actually, why? Because actually they have been given some information, but not overdosed with it, and embedded in the sensory experience that they are actually having.
Mm.
So then it becomes very empowering. So you are actually going to be using your skills, but actually, I would say at a higher level with much more discernment,
Yes.
rather than throwing lots of stuff in the patient and hoping something sticks.
Yeah, throwing a load of mud at the wall and hoping some of it sticks, as you say. And I think a great way to test the success of that approach at the end of a session is to just gently ask, what's been really interesting for you in the session? Or you could ask, what have you learned in the session, as long as that doesn't feel too pressured. And I think it's okay if there's a mildly uncomfortable moment there where the patient thinks, oh God, I haven't actually noticed anything. Because to a certain extent, I think coaching does require your patient to work a little bit harder than perhaps you're making them work at the moment, but in a very loving way and for very good reasons, in that you want them to be able to own this process and take control of it. And in my experience, the thing they tell you they've learned is often not the thing I thought I was conveying at all, but is hugely significant to them.
Massively,
And
massively.
you have to be okay with that and go, okay, so and how might you use that piece of information? This is a great way to lead into a home exercise program. How might you use that information, that thing you've learned today, or that awareness that you've had? How are you going to apply that to this situation? And that's, a great way to check what they've taken away and how you might build on that in the future.
Well, that kind of relates to something that something I teach and something I do in my own practice. Is usually the last thing that I'll say to someone is, I'm really looking forward to hearing, what you find out between now and the next session. So they are already
Primed, yeah.
to be paying attention. So they're not just going away and going, right, I've got to make time for half an hour of exercise every day. It is literally, what are you going to find out? And that's when they come back with the gold. Well, because I can feel my feet, I notice now that when I go out for my walk, da 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 da, or I notice that when I'm filling up my water with the tap, with the kettle, I do this funky thing. I'm like, oh, really? Yeah. So they said, why do I do that? I'm like, you're obviously solving a problem somehow, but did you look at whether there was another possibility? Yes. And then and so this is where some of the ease starts to come in the session. They start coming back and telling you, these are the things I've found out. And then that's what you then take as your next.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that I'll have the clinicians come back, and this is when they're on the courses, actually identifying a bit of a sense of unease, because they say, well, it feels like the patient's treating themselves. I don't feel like I'm doing anything. And it's such an interesting moment to identify, when actually you've set up the conditions for a patient to truly take charge of the situation, find their own insights, come back, share those with you, take that next step. you've done the really important stuff, the stuff that the
Mm.
evidence says should be what we're doing.
Mm.
But
You've
because
got your A and your P, your analysis and your plan sorted. Mm.
absolutely, but because you haven't done the equivalent of the physiotherapy equivalent of the British lunchbox. Right. So okay. Yeah, we're pulling from everywhere now. When I first arrived in the UK, it was 1996, and I went to work in the NHS, Cardiff Royal Infirmary. And I had come from 5 years living in Hawaii, and I'd come from Australia, obviously. So different. Lunchtime comes, and I'm intrigued that everybody has the same lunch. So they sit down, and everyone has a little box, and in the box is a sandwich, a piece of fruit, a small packet of crisps, and a penguin bar. And I'm like, everybody's eating this. I'm there with like leftover, like, homemade stir fry, whatever. Everyone's doing the same thing. And the physiotherapy equivalent is, it used to be, and now, of course, people have arguments about it. It used to be a couple of techniques, a couple of exercises. It was this little package that kind of made you feel like, oh, I've done a good job because.
Yeah.
So we are talking about a different model here. But it's a model we can actually be comfortable with in the context of the current discussions around evidence, because we know that the funny little thing that we used to do, actually isn't the one that has shown to have massive shifts in outcomes. So if we can recognize that and go, oh, actually, instead of trying to do more of that to get a different outcome, maybe we could look at this situation over here where we're still using the skills and dropping them in. So do you still use manual therapy? Yes, I do. But when do I use it? I use it when we have decided that we want a certain, to achieve a certain movement, for example, and they can't get there.
Can't feel it.
It's it'll be sometimes the quickest, most utilitarian little tiny step, which is immediately integrated then into the movement. And what is your experience of it? And let's explore it and let's play with it. So I would still use it, but in its place. It isn't the treatment. It is just a facilitation of us getting towards a specific objective.
Yeah, it doesn't turn it into a passive receiving of either information or a technique. It's part of that facilitation process.
Yeah.
I was just thinking whilst listening to you mindfully then, Joanne. So my dad growing up, for some reason, and probably more to do with his history, absolutely refused ever to give me advice. I mean, maybe when I was very young he did, but in my memory of being a teenager and certainly being a student, I'd occasionally find myself in a pickle about things as you do. And if I ever asked him, invariably his answer was, I don't know, it's your life, do what you want, which in a way was empowering. It was often quite frustrating because sometimes I just wanted my dad to tell me what to do. Then probably I could blame him for the. But I was brought up with that. I don't know, it's your life, you decide. And I'm remembering when I first realized that I had a coaching approach, it actually wasn't with patients. I'm just thinking about this because so many of our scenarios today have been clinician patient. I really realized that was my preferred way when I started conducting one-to-ones with physiotherapists that were working in our clinic, because they would be talking about where their career might be going next, what courses they might need to do to make sure they got every single patient that ever walked through their door better. Haha. And invariably, what was going through my head was, I don't know, it's your life. You're a different person and a different clinician to me. You need to decide for yourself. And I would find myself asking questions about all sorts of weird stuff that had nothing to do with them as a physiotherapist or a clinician, and trying to draw a bit more out of them. This was way before I had either received coaching myself or learnt about it. But then it just felt like an intuitive process. So maybe I need to thank my rather stubborn and occasionally difficult dad for getting me comfortable with that process. But
Yeah. Actually, yeah, because I had the opposite. I had a wonderfully engaged, father, but he was an advice
a
person.
giver. Mm,
And so yes, trying to crawl out from underneath that. But also that gives a bit of insight too, is that like if someone's giving you lots of advice, for what you should do, you can feel the inherent pressure inside if that's not necessarily a match. And understanding what that's like on the other side when
mm,
as a therapist, you can find yourself in that same, and you're doing it from the best motivations.
mm,
However, is it best for you long term to be taking that role? And is it best practice, actually?
mm,
Is it in the patient's best interests?
mm,
Um, and so, yeah, having that flexibility, it keeps it real.
mm,
Also means that everyone has the chance to be a lot more transparent, because people will sometimes come and say, right, are you going to be able to fix me? Well, first of all, we're going to have to understand what that might mean to them, you know. And sometimes I've got to honestly say, look, I know we can be somewhere different to where we are, but I can't actually say where that's going to
mm,
be because we both need to put our feet on this path together. And we'll work together on this to find out, you know.
mm.
That's the honest truth. If I'm going to set up going, yes, of course, I will be able to fix you, then that's completely unrealistic because that is something that, well, first of all, as I said, I don't know what fix means to that person. And what they think fix means at the beginning may be different.
Mm.
And we all know that scenario too. The patient comes back. It happened to me last week. Oh, I'm not any better. Oh, okay. So let's talk about what you've been doing this week. Well, when we met, we had show-stopping knee pain. We couldn't go up and down the stairs. You know, we couldn't do the sport. We couldn't run. We couldn't sit down in a chair. So what has actually happened this week? Oh, well, actually going up and down the stairs. How's that been? Oh, not really a big problem. And what else have we done? Oh, I went for a run. Oh, how was that? Well, it was okay during it, a bit sore afterwards though. Okay. And as we kind of unfolded it, it was just like, so how do we feel about that initial statement if it's not any better? And he just laughed.
Mhm.
And went, yeah, okay. It's actually, and then he brightened up quite considerably too, because he was feeling quite down.
Mm.
Um, and again, being willing to question, because I know what
Yeah.
happens otherwise. The patient comes back, says, I'm no better. And what happens?
Yeah. Change
Clinician.
plan, do something else, bring another tool out.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's just settle down and ask a few more questions.
Mm.
Mm.
So, Joanne, if people are listening to this and thinking, this sounds great, this sounds like something I would like in my life, clinical life and personal life as well,
Mm.
um, we are going to share some details, aren't we? Or we've put together a little slide, which I will find some way to share with this podcast. I may have already done that by the time this goes out. Who knows? Jack March, this is your job. And within that, we've got a QR code. And what we're doing at the moment is we are just collecting names of people who think this sounds like an interesting idea and would like to know more when we officially launch Coaching Unpeeled next year. Is that right, Joanne? Have I set that out correctly?
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, just to pick up on just what you had said previously about, that those feelings about coaching and how
Mm,
stuff and how do we do that? The really big thing about this is that we have literally peeled away the things that you could get confused by or lost by or anything else, and gone, these are the key things that we're going to bring from coaching into practice for the benefits we've talked about, more
yeah,
sustainable for you and for the patient. And so, we've kind of made it quite a streamlined kind of workshop, maybe you say course, workshop, whatever it is, education.
mm,
So yes, we are definitely just collecting your interests. The date will be available soon. We'll be doing coming into it early part of next year. And yeah, I think we both would be really delighted to be able to share this work
Mm,
with everybody,
absolutely.
you know.
And it seems to be a common way that Joanne and I work, and it's very in line with coaching. I think what we're saying is if you trust us and you're willing to trust the process, then give us your name, give us your email, and we will walk along the path with you.
That's exactly it. Exactly it. And possibly ask some questions.
Yes, who knows? Is
It's
there
going to be an
anything?
adventure. Can't wait.
No, me too. I'm really excited. It's a lovely thing to look forward to be doing next year. All right. Well, it's a beautiful day. I'm going to let you go now, Joanne. I know you've got other things to go and do this lovely afternoon. So thank you so much for being a wonderful guest again. Really appreciate talking to you in whatever scenario, but particularly on these podcasts, it's really valuable. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for having me, because this is actually so nice to be able to talk about the real issues and the real
Yeah.
experiences, and not be like theoretical about it.
No.
It's a
The
wonderful.
pith. Talk about the pith.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we're going to all get a bit unpeeled, and reveal the pith.
Yes. And now we're going to pith off because
Yeah,
we
we're going to pick
finished.
up. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Joe.
Pleasure. Take care, Joe. Bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation and also that it may have whetted your appetite a little bit more for all things coaching and specifically how coaching applies to you as a clinician. If that is the case and you would like to be on the mailing list to receive more information about Coaching Unpeeled as it unfolds or as it unpeels, then look for the link in the notes. There's a form you can complete and you'll go straight onto our mailing list, and any information as it appears will be directly in your inbox. You'll be first to know. So it's December, and no more You Matters this year, no more You Matters before Christmas. So if you are someone who is accustomed to being all things to everybody in all spheres of life, then goodness me, doesn't December provide some opportunities to exercise that particular people-pleasing muscle? Why not instead give it a little bit of a rest? Why not book in some time, some moments specifically for you? Not just in December. Why not make that a New Year's resolution? Because you absolutely do bloody matter. Happy Christmas. Happy New Year. See you for more episodes in 2025.